Hey loves, how's it going? So, this month's workshop is Hypocrisy and Living Our Values. So, the reason why I felt like this was pretty apropos for what is happening currently in the collective is I see a lot of people really um, kind of out of rapport with their subconscious mind. So, what that basically means is when we say something and then do something else. So, let's say, for example, you're like, oh, I really want to start waking up early so that I can, have a morning ritual and set myself up for having a really good day. Instead of waiting until the last minute, like hitting snooze on my alarm a whole bunch of times and just like not, having to rush basically for the rest of the day. So, what happens because our conscious mind is like, yeah, that sounds great, right? Our subconscious mind is like, well, but we have survived this whole time without waking up any earlier than what we usually do, so it's kind of unnecessary. So that's what I mean when I say we're out of rapport with our subconscious mind. Basically, we are saying one thing and then doing something else. So we're saying that we're going to wake up early, but we're going to continue to hit the snooze button on our alarm until the very last minute and then rush around like normal. So we're going to kind of talk about that. And I know that some people might be a little bit resistant to the fact that I did call this hypocrisy and living our values. And I know a lot of people get triggered or have this sort of like knee jerk reaction to the idea that they might be hypocrites. But the thing is, literally all of us are because we are human and because we do have um, that disconnect between our conscious mind and our subconscious mind sometimes. Like it just happens. Our conscious mind really wants to do everything that is healthy for us and, that's going to be really beneficial for us. But if the programming that's running in our subconscious mind conflicts with that, then our subconscious programming is going to win out every single time, unless we are really very, very consciously pushing through all of that. And so that's really what this is about, is understanding the fact that hypocrisy is not a bad thing. It's not wrong. It's just something we all do. It's basically just that break in rapport between our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. So the break in or the disconnect in what we say versus what we are doing. So that is really what that is. Um, and that's it. Like no more, no less. We just have to look at this in, as we do everything else, a very neutral way. It's not positive, it's not negative, it's not right, it's not wrong. It just is what it is, and that's all that it is. So let's kind of break down what exactly hypocrisy is a little bit more than I just have in that little tidbit in our welcome sequence. So I know that it's pretty difficult for our subconscious minds to hear that we are hypocrites, but we're human and this is what happens. So we've all been hypocritical at one point or another because we all have blind spots. We all have unconscious bias and programs that are running in the background. And a lot of times we don't even realize it. Sorry, guys. Let me turn off my volume. So we don't even realize sometimes that we have these blind spots, that we have these unconscious biases, because if we are unaware of something, then it would be what? Unconscious, right? So meaning we don't actually realize that that is something that is happening. Um, so none of us, without exception, none of us is fully conscious and aware of all of our filters, all of our bias, all of our programming 100% of the time. Literally nobody, because it would overload our brains to be conscious and aware of everything all the time. That would mean you would be consciously aware of your blood pumping, your organs working, your heart beating. You would have to be thinking about all of this. Like, you would have to think consciously about walking, about breathing, about, okay, like if you're going to drive somewhere, you would be super conscious of everything, of that car over there, of that house, of that person crossing the road, of, that thing in the road, or like there's so many things that we are unconscious of, because our subconscious mind is like distorting, deleting, or generalizing things. And if you go back to our I think it was our very first workshop around awareness, we talk a little bit more about distortion, deletion, and generalization. So, just kind of as an FYI, when we generalize, when we make when we say things like stereotypes, those are actually parts of how our brain functions. It likes our subconscious mind groups things together. So that just is like that's just part of being human. It's not, again, it's not like wrong. It isn't like just you. Literally all of us do it. That's part of how our brain works. It deletes, distorts, and generalizes information so that we don't have to think about everything we see, or come into experience with as a whole new thing. Could you imagine if every tree, every rock, every person that you came into contact with was a whole new experience? Even if you came into contact with it before, even if you'd seen it before, you would treat every stop sign like a new stop sign, every tree like a new tree, every rock like a new rock. So every single thing would be new, and our brains would just be completely overloaded. We would have like no time to pretty much do anything except notice all of these things in our environment. And that is like, a function again of our subconscious mind, is to take in all that data and then filter it out into that deletion, distortion, and generalization. So moving forward on my tangent. So let's break down what exactly hypocrisy is and why it's important to identify any kind of hypocrisy or blind spots that we have in our lives, so that we're able to course correct and actually live our values instead of just talking about living our values. Remember, like I said before, that disconnect between what we say and what we do. So, by definition, hypocrisy means claiming to have moral standards or beliefs to which one's own behavior contradicts or does not conform. So, essentially means saying one thing and doing exactly the opposite. I know I have absolutely done this without even realizing it, and sometimes while realizing it. It's really easy to talk about our values or standards on an intellectual level while simultaneously deviating from those things we sometimes act so high and mighty about. And the thing is, like, we really do have to kind of knock ourselves off our high horse a little bit. Like, we all make mistakes. We all live in hypocrisy at one point or another. Sometimes we live it 24/7. For those people who are really, really unaware. So it's just kind of coming back down to this realization of like, I'm still human. I know it's super easy to get carried away with our emotions, and we feel like we are on the moral high ground for some things. But if we are trying to strip one group of people's rights away, for example, because we feel like, well, it would be the right thing to do, for quote unquote the greater good, right? But we feel like we are justified and we feel like we are right. When we see that action on the opposite end of the spectrum and we feel like they're wrong. So let me give you an example. So let's say, like, I'll push the buttons of the high ticket items that are usually on the chopping block. Hey, so like abortion and gun rights. Okay, like um, if you're for abortion, you're like, well, everyone should be able to choose and everyone should be able to make that choice, right? Yes, totally agree. But on that same token, you're looking at the other side and being like, okay, gun rights, no, absolutely not. Nobody should have them. Take their rights away, right? That is in conflict because you're saying on one hand that we should all have the right to choose, but on the other hand, you're saying, well, I don't agree with that, so no one should have that right. Right? So that's what I mean by hypocrisy and not living our values. We're saying that we get to cherry pick what is right and what is wrong based on our own internal values, and then putting that on the greater good, right? Quote unquote, the greater good, right? We're saying we know what is best for everyone. And so, like, that's ridiculous, right? I think we can all agree that everyone should have their own right to choose what it is that they do, what actions they take, what actions they don't take, what they subscribe to and what they don't. And like, it's none of our business for the most part, unless like someone is hurting someone else. It really is not any of our business, what other people are choosing to do with their money, time, etc. Um, so moving forward, right? We have to kind of like remember everyone is a sentient being, right? We all deserve to make our own choices as long as we're not hurting other people, we're not hurting other sentient beings, then, excellent. Free choice for all. So, the first thing I want to say is that we're taught our values from a young age. And so we typically act by them. But this doesn't mean that we do so all the time. So we make excuses like, oh, it's just this one time, or oh, it's not really going against what I believe in, etc. For example, if your job is asking you to do something that you don't really necessarily feel comfortable with, but you feel like, oh, I have to do this because it's my job, like I don't want to get fired or whatever. So we will often go against what feels right, what we know is correct, our morals, and our values. We may go against those things when we feel pressured, like we absolutely have to do this, otherwise, something bad is going to happen. So there's nothing wrong with this, but it does leave us in a bit of a subconscious bind. So we're essentially telling our subconscious that we're not trustworthy, that we don't follow through, and because of this, we need to look for authority outside of ourselves. So this is a vicious cycle since there are times when we act hypocritically based on outside stimuli. Just like I said a moment ago, if we feel like we're being asked to do something that goes against our morals and values from our job, we feel like we kind of have to, otherwise, we'll get fired or we'll be reprimanded or something will happen to us that is a negative consequence. And so and this is not everybody all the time, obviously, but some people, feel like, oh my gosh, I have to do this even though I don't feel right about it, but it's for my job or whatever. So let's say that you do something that is out of integrity for you. So something that really goes against your morals or your values. So how do you feel when that happens? Or what thoughts come up when you do this? So think about that, write that down. You don't have to do it right this moment, but like come back to this question at the end, and kind of go through that, see how you feel, reflect on that, and really just like I have you guys do all the time, just free flow with this. Don't edit yourself. Don't go back and say that's wrong or that's right. Just free flow right with this, so that you can really see what's actually coming up without putting that, edit on it. So if you're someone, and I feel like all of you are, right? If you're someone who feels really gross or bad or upset or just like blah when behaving contrary to your values, do you stop the behavior or do you do it anyways? So asking yourself these kinds of questions is really going to help you become aware of when, i.e., your strategy, you're willing to bend your behavior and when you are not. So what that means is you're going to essentially see like, okay, so it's okay to bend the rules of this to not live my values and morals if this is the case. So these situations are okay and these situations are not okay. Do you see what I'm saying? So we have actually been conditioned to do exactly this, like a lot. So accountability and integrity are really lost actions these days. Everywhere we look, we see people getting away with all kinds of bullshit, and no one really seems to ever be accountable for it. It's ignored, it's forgotten, it's excused. We continue as a society to settle for and accept this behavior. And we see it in the media, we see it on social media. I mean, like we live it on the daily in so many different ways. And there are a million different reasons for this, and so many of which coincide with our careers. So we feel pressure to do things we might not ordinarily do if we feel like we have no other choice. If we feel like our job, our finances are on the line, our relationship is at stake, we look to the perceived consequences and fear of losing something versus the consequences of losing our personal authority and handing it off to someone or something else. So if you think about it, we see this like loss of job, loss of finance as a bigger consequence, a more like scary consequence than the fear of losing ourselves, losing our personal authority, and just being like, okay, well, someone else can tell me what to do all the time, right? That's fine, as long as they're going to pay me for it. You know what I'm saying? So many people believe that there will always be something around to tell them what the correct thing to do is. And I know a lot of people like this who really count on other people or outside situations to tell them whether or not the action that they're taking is correct. So whether it's someone they look up to, if it's a religion, an influencer, etc. So they follow the example of those people because they're looking for that authority since they cannot find it anymore within themselves, right? They've been taking these actions that go against their subconscious, basically reinforcing the fact that they are untrustworthy to their subconscious. And so because our subconscious does not see us as our as an authority, it doesn't recognize our own personal agency, so then we go look to someone else, right? It's the hierarchy system, and we will talk about that pretty soon, probably next month, and kind of like get into why hierarchy system has really fucked us up, and kind of what we can do instead. That I can't see our hierarchy system in society changing, but if we change our minds about it and if we kind of see things from a different perspective, then we can kind of, again, bring that agency and authority back to ourselves where it belongs instead of looking to other people, right? So this is what hypocritical behavior does to us. It confuses the hell out of us, and we can't figure out why we feel so shitty all the time. It's because we're not aware that we have been acting in conflict or acting out of rapport with our values and acting without integrity. So, a few more questions to ask yourself. And again, really just free write these. Don't edit yourself. Let it come as it comes, right? So, how do I feel about hypocrisy in myself? How do I feel about hypocrisy in others? What do I believe about hypocrisy? What was I taught about hypocrisy? What are my own hypocritical actions, and how can I now see them with compassion and forgive myself? Now that I have identified the contrasting behavior, what can I choose to do instead? So it's really important to look at this with that observational eye rather than our judgmental one, and really just notice, okay, here's what I've been doing that I hadn't realized I was doing on a regular basis that actually is out of integrity for me, and out of I'm acting out of rapport with my morals and my values. So it's super important to just acknowledge those things, to look at them, to become aware of them, so that we can course correct and try something else, right? Because when we act with integrity, when we're acting in authority, then things feel better. Life gets more aligned, like things are falling into place, versus when we are not acting that way, it really changes how things flow for us. So let's talk about living your values. So what exactly does that mean? So let's dig into our values and how to actually live them so that we are in alignment with ourselves, and so that we can begin to create more love, joy, and enthusiasm for the lives we live, and why that's even important. Like, I don't know about you, but I often think about like how important it is to live in joy, in enthusiasm, in love, versus running around, just kind of living from autopilot and not actually really taking any kind of time to enjoy life. Like, what the shit is that? So let me ask you a couple questions, and I want you to take as long as you need to think about them and answer. Question number one: how much do you trust yourself? And question number two: do you see yourself as your own authority, or do you search outside of yourself for answers, guidance, direction, etc.? So take a while to think about that. And again, you can, what I often do is I'll do a free write around certain things, and then kind of go back and really sit and consider. But these questions, I really want you to think about them. So do the free write first, and then sit and think, okay, really though, do I trust myself? If I do, how much do I trust myself? What do I trust myself with? What don't I trust myself with, right? So kind of dig into these questions and take it a step further. See, what do you trust yourself with, what you don't trust yourself with. How far, do you see yourself as an authority at all? Like, or maybe just a little bit, you see yourself as an authority for these things, but not these things, right? So think about that. And just kind of, like I said, let your answers flow, and then do a little bit of a deep dive. So here's why I want you to take your time with those questions. And really, most of the questions that I ask you is because we're super quick to answer without thinking. So we're running on autopilot, right? All the time. Like, it's like not even a question. Like, you might be like, well, I don't run on autopilot. Like, and I am just like gonna stop you right there and tell you absolutely 100% you are running on autopilot at least 95% of the time. That means every single day, 95% of your day, you are running on autopilot. We all are. And that could extend even more. Some people are running on autopilot 99.6% of the time, right? So that's even closer to 100%. And like, let me give you an example. So, I was completely distracted yesterday. And like, I was with my husband, and we were at the grocery store. We were leaving, walking to the car with our grocery cart, and we went down the wrong aisle and I was like, oh, we parked over there. I didn't even look. I literally did not even look behind me to check and see if there was a car coming down the aisle before I just like stepped out into the middle of the aisle. I never do that. This is not something that I do, but I was completely distracted thinking about something else and just kind of walking back to the car on autopilot. So I literally didn't even like notice that this was a thing until I was like, oh shit. Like I literally just walked right out and didn't even look to see if there was a car coming. So that's what I mean. And I was like, whoa, there are definitely people who literally their whole day is like that. And like I honestly can't imagine living that way. That's just me though. There are definitely people who that's how they prefer it, right? So I know I fall more along the 95% than the 99%, but it's really important to notice like when that's happening. When you are running on autopilot, which you know you're not really going to notice that until something kind of disrupts you. But know that you are, whether it's 95 or 99.6, every single human on the planet, every single thing is running on autopilot that much of the time, right? So, because our subconscious likes to move quickly, it will just pop out an answer. So it's like it will give you an answer super quick. And so like I can ask you something like, "Do you trust yourself?" And you'll be like, "Yep." And it may not even be like really a full answer. So sometimes we're not even really thinking about the question that's being asked. We're just like, for example, have you ever been to a restaurant and you like ordered and then the you know the staff asked you the same question twice? Or you ask the same question twice. Like someone says, "How are you?" and you're like, "Good, how are you?" And they're like, "Good, how are you?" You know, um, it's just kind of this little thing that we do because that's just kind of how our brain is working. So ego has a little to do with it as well, and because our subconscious mind will never make us a liar, we will almost always say things to make ourselves look good when someone else is asking us a tough question. So take your time, consider, ask yourself how often you act from your values and how often you contradict yourself. Be the observer. And most importantly, actually utilize the feedback you receive to make changes and see what direction you would rather take, right? So sometimes when we sit with a thing for a little while, we have a realization because ultimately your subconscious mind knows what needs to be healed. So it will help you see things, but it's up to you to consciously take note and then decide on an action plan. Honesty is something that just about everyone says they value, especially in relationships. But how many times have you been dishonest in a relationship? This includes the relationship you have with yourself. I'll give you some time with that one because I know that some of your egos are having a tantrum right now. How dare you insinuate? How dare I insinuate that you're dishonest? I'm calling you a liar, blah, 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 right? A lot of these alarms are going off like, oh my God, how dare you? This is wrong, etc., etc. And you know, that's just that self-preservation instinct, right? Like that's fine. And we can kind of let that go, right? We can be like, okay, cool, thanks, ego, no worries, whatevs. It's not a big deal. Um, and move from there, right? But if we just give in to the ego tantrum, then honestly, we're really never going to get anywhere because our ego is always going to want to be right. It's always going to be like, no, it's going to try and be the loudest voice. So it's really important to kind of consider a little deeper than just what your ego says, and really honestly answer this question. Because I've actually had clients, a ridiculous amount of clients, who have talked about honesty and who are just like, who constantly complain about their relationships, and rather than communicate, fix their relationships, or, go a different way, they stay in their relationships and they cheat on their partner, and then they cry about honesty. And it's kind of like, well, are you being honest? Are you telling, your partner that this is what you're doing? So we can't bitch and complain about something that's not happening on someone else's end when we ourselves are doing the same thing, and acting in contradiction, acting in conflict, saying we want honesty, but being dishonest people. So really, really consider that and notice where you have been dishonest, how you act out of integrity, how you act dishonestly. And it is okay, because sometimes we don't realize it. Sometimes we do, and we do it intentionally. But the point is to come to this awareness and again decide, okay, let's come back to this example of, crying about not having honesty in a relationship and while simultaneously cheating on our partner, right? So in that example, we have to ask ourselves, okay, wait a minute, is cheating on my partner making my relationship better? Is it making honesty something that is happening at all or consistently? Probably not, right? So we really need to examine those actions and see, is that moving us closer to where we want to be or further away, right? It's all feedback. It's all just data that we can utilize to make new choices. So take a minute, let your ego trip, and then invite it to sit for tea and conversation. If your ego isn't going off right now, you can skip the next exercise, but I'd stick around for it anyway because it may come in handy when your ego does have a meltdown. So, I call this one the ego exercise. So ask your ego these questions. Pause and really take a moment to listen to the answers that come up. This shit is gonna come up automatically, like our fucking ego always does. It's always got something to say, and that's cool, right? Make friends with your ego, because it's important to understand our ego. Our ego is never trying to hurt us, it's trying to protect us, right? So we just have to be compassionate to it. It's in this fight or flight mode all the time, all the time. It's living in fear all the time. We have to have compassion for things and people who live in fear all the time, because they're operating, from that place of oh my God, oh, what do I do? Right? So just be compassionate, right? So ask your ego these questions. Why does it bother you that we have been dishonest at some point in the past? What do you believe about honesty and dishonesty? Now, take a moment and recall a time or two where you were dishonest, regardless of the reason, right? So think about that. Really think about one particular time. And ask your ego how it feels about these memories and what does it mean to your ego. And finally, remind your ego that you are not inherently bad and that new and honest choices can be made going forward. Right? Because we can always change. We are not married to who and what we are right in this moment. We can absolutely change every single moment of every single day if that's what we choose, right? So here's the thing. The less honest we are, the more we contradict ourselves and behave in conflict with our values. The less and less we trust ourselves, and the less and less our subconscious mind views us as the authority, right? Which means that this is yet one more way we're perpetuating a cycle of giving away our agency to someone else, living our lives the way that someone else sees is right for us, whether we realize this is happening or not, right? So like I could say, and I know I've used this example before, but like it's a really good one. So I could say something to you like, well, I don't believe in the weather, right? So just because I'm saying that I don't believe in it literally doesn't make it not exist, right? It exists whether I believe in it or not. It exists whether I, am willing to acknowledge that it's happening or not, right? And so that's what we have to realize is that just because our ego is telling us nope, 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 and having a little tantrum and we're like actively trying to avoid something doesn't mean that it isn't happening. If we're constantly in this place of trying to keep ourselves blind to things, to avoid certain things, that doesn't make the things untrue or unreal or that they're not happening, right? My biggest wish is for everyone to be able to take back their agency and authority. This is the most healing work because it brings us back to our personal natural states, right? So when we live according to other people, it doesn't really feel good. We feel lost, we feel incomplete, we're searching, we're frantic, we're anxious, and a whole host of other crappy things. And there's really no logical reason for it. So it is time that we break the cycle and help others to do the same thing by leading by example. And this is another thing that's been very lost in our society as of late. We don't understand what leading by example means anymore. So let's do a little exercise. Think back to your childhood. What did your family or caretakers value, and make a list? Looking at your list, in what ways do you live these values through your actions? And which values do you only give lip service to? Meaning, which values do you only talk about? Now, write down a list of traits you value in yourself and a list of traits that you value in others. Compare the two lists. Are there any similarities or contrasts? Notice which values feel right to you and which values you don't place any meaning or weight on. Finally, write out a list of values that align with your true self-identity. And once you're done writing down your values, write out different ways you are going to live those values through your actions, meaning you are going to live and act in integrity with your values, not in hypocrisy by saying one thing and doing another. So let me ask you, what has been stopping you from living your values? And like I said, there could be a lot of reasons where we are in that fight or flight mode where we're like, oh, I have to do this for my relationship. I have to do this for my job, right? So think about those things that you feel like are kind of dictating whether you live in integrity or not. And now that you have a better understanding of how your past behavior has affected your subconscious and therefore your daily life, what plan of action are you putting into place now? So, what actions will you be doing instead of the ones you've been taking that are more aligned with your values and what you believe? You aren't required to be someone that you're not. You are not required to please anyone and everyone. You're not required to hold on tightly to a version of you that has expired just because it makes other people comfortable. You must be true to yourself first and foremost. You must be you for yourself first and foremost. You must be pleased with who you are first and foremost. You are fluid and ever changing, ever growing. Your evolution must be true to you. Otherwise, it's not evolution, it's a performance. Okay? So, I don't say this to be morbid, but to offer some perspective. Think about when you are at the end of your life. Will you be pleased to say that you always lived for others? Will you regret not living your own life for yourself? Will you wish you did things differently? Will you know who you truly were? Not living your values doesn't make you a bad person, but it does fuck with your capacity to love, to heal, enjoy your life, maintain healthy relationships, and just your overall general ability to feel content. It's okay if you've been stuck in conditioning or living the values that were only important to others, right? It happens to all of us at some point or another. But you realize it now, and that is what is important. So, what's important is that you look at this feedback, right? And you say, okay, so this is what's happened thus far. Like living my life by the standards of other people, this is where I am. This is what doesn't feel good. This is what I wish I would have done instead of this, right? And then we say, okay, now that I have this feedback, what can I do instead? How can I take different actions moving forward so that I can be happy with where I am, so that I do enjoy my life on my terms, right? So remember, above all, this is a process. It changes, you change, you learn, you grow. You can only do the best that you can every day, and that is it. So I hope that this is helpful for you. If you have any questions, you can shoot me an email or a DM on Instagram. Otherwise, I'll see you soon. Bye.